Mr. Behrends, how are you, sir?
Very well. How are you today?
Really good. Thanks for spreading your story here, spreading the word. What is your relationship to Tim Walz?
Well, we were fellow first sergeants in the one of the 125 Field Artillery back, in the early 2000s. We deployed to Europe, to get in the same battalion, but we were in different batteries of the battalion. So we ended up in different places. I was up in England, and he was in Italy. And then we were over there from 03 to 04, and we got back, and then started drilling, and we were both E8s, so we both were in the run for an E9 position somewhere in the state, and then in the fall I got selected for a position, sergeant major position up in Davarty Division Artillery, and then he got selected as the acting command sergeant major for one of the 125 Field Artillery.
So what's the problem? What's your concern with Tim Walz?
Well, the problem, is that over the course of the next few months, from 04 and 05, he did his job. I mean, he was acting command sergeant major, going to drill, and then spring rolled around and a warning order came out, and then it basically said the 1st Brigade Combat Team, which one of the 125 was under, was going to be deploying to Iraq, in the future, sometime between now and, in 2 years, I think maybe is how they put it at that point. And then 2 months later, he walked out the door and was gone. And there was nothing that really said he couldn't do that. It was just the wrong thing to do. I mean, technically, after you have 20 years, then you can retire anytime you want. But the timing was just suspicious, and he was gone. So it was like, well, he's gone. His name is strucken from all records and all obelisks, and he was out of the unit, and nobody talked about him. And I got called to go, and I did, and then he was campaigning for office, and he started that fall already, actually, because the election was in 06. And and he was I'm retired command sergeant major, and just that was like the first thing he would say in his campaigns half the time, speeches, and it was like all of the command sergeant majors that were in training were like, he is not one. I mean, he didn't finish the school that he. When you get selected to be in a E9 position, you sign a memorandum of understanding that you're going to finish the academy, United States Army Sergeant Major's Academy. You're going to stay in 2 years after that, because the military's got a lot of money invested in you, which is taxpayers' money. And then if you don't do that, you basically get reduced to master sergeant, and that's where you're at. You are never given an opportunity ever again that I know of. I mean, if you're done with that, you're done. But he used that campaigning ruthlessly to trick the public into thinking he was higher ranked than he was. And he got elected in 06, and we were in Iraq, and there was people over there that I was bound by the regulations that you can't speak out against somebody running for politics. So I kept my mouth shut, but I know one guy called him out on it, and put an article in the window in a paper back then, and called him out on lying, and and then he threw out the whole thing. How dare you disrespect a fellow veteran, and that's against the rule. You shouldn't do that, and and you owe me an apology. Just all this BS like that, and then. So that's how it all started. I mean, it was literally just this whole rank thing. I mean, he's a military imposter is what he is. If you look that up on, all the different things that these military imposters will do. I mean, there's a civilian version of it that buys a uniform at Goodwill and puts it on and walks around and acts like he's something he's not. And then you have the military ones that do a higher rank than they are, or they might have more medals or ribbons than they actually earned, or they might have service stripes that are, show they put in more years or whatever. But he's in that same category, and he literally has done it for political gain. I mean, there's no doubt about it because he continues to let it, like you had on your show earlier. I mean, that he doesn't correct anybody for saying it. He doesn't, and he uses it himself. But, I think he doesn't use it now anymore that he's on a national stage. But, he had the media in Minnesota under his thumb, and he kind of kept the narrative going.
What's the big deal? Who cares?
Well, that's a valid point on the Democratic side. Like, yeah, who cares? But the whole thing is he's doing stolen valor for profit, basically, because profit and fame, and that's a bad thing to do to other soldiers that actually put in the time and actually did it. I mean, there's command sergeant majors I met in Iraq that died, got shot down. They buried all 7 of their remains. I don't know if they're all together in Arlington, but they literally, they picked out what they picked out and they put them in a tomb in Arlington. And if those people could come out and speak that this guy did not finish this guy is not a command sergeant major, I think that they would be standing right beside where I'm at and telling this guy, cease and desist. This is not who you are, and please refrain from doing it because you did not earn that rank. We did.
That's right.
And we died.
There's a lot of weird things about it, a lot of worse than weird, terrible things. But what's bizarre is command sergeant major, right? Very high, very distinguished. But so is sergeant major. Right? So why, or whatever? Why go one rank up? Why exaggerate?
It's the top of the food chain. I mean, it's literally like, you're like Tom Brady in the Super Bowl at that point. I mean, you're the big dog. You're the 12-point buck in the woods, or even more probably. I mean, you're the king, kind of what it boils down to. And for when you say that term out there to the general public, they're like, wow. Just like the guy I was on the phone with earlier said, his dad was a chief master sergeant in the Air Force, and when you see that rank on somebody, or you even hear that name, chief. I mean, I had a kid that called me that one time. He didn't know the difference between Air Force and Army, and he was just, wow, a chief. And I was like, well, thank you, son, but I'm a command sergeant major, but that. If you look at war movies, you look at this guy it's like David Bellavia said, he's the shining star, or the shining sun above the unit. I mean, he's, your lowest unit as a command sergeant major you have is a battalion, which is 500 people. I mean, a master sergeant, which is what he retired at, they're technically, same rank as a first sergeant. That's 100 people. So, in that area. So, I mean, it's 5 times more prestigious than a first sergeant.
Yes, very well said. He just misspoke, Tom. That's all. He just misspoke.
You mean he lied?
Well, listen, I got weapons of war in war. You're reading into it too much. What do you think is the most egregious example, like the most obvious, like, oh, no, okay, you knew and you lied on purpose?
There's so many of them in his resume that that's what I kind of reckon that, or I kind of came up with the meme of he's in an outhouse, sitting in there, and he's scared shitless. good meme. But he's sitting in there, and we finally drug him out of there into the light, and everybody can see him now, and he's standing there like like something that don't like the light, and we're actually digging into the basement of his outhouse now and going through all these layers and months and all the years of all this crap that's been going on, and I never even knew this thing existed till, you national reporters went out and dug this up on him, because, it's just amazing that, even in that whole thing, that whole spiel he was spewing out there. I mean, the first thing he said, he was in the Army for 25 years. So it's like, the first statement out of his mouth is a lie. Then it goes into, these weapons of war, which, if you dig into what a weapon of war is, I mean, I have a 9mm M9 Beretta. That's a weapon of war. I've got AR-15s that technically are not a weapon of war. And for him to make that statement, the general public, and, that's the problem that we have out there now is people see a black rifle and they're just like, well, that's a weapon of war. Well, it might look like one, but it's not one because it doesn't have 3-round burst capability, or it doesn't have fully automatic like an M16 did. So, number 2 lie right in that whole spiel is that what is a weapon of war? And then he goes into saying that he carried a weapon of war in war, and he was in Italy, and our operation on our DD-214 states that we were there in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. But he spun that whole thing over the years to be like, well, we were there, and then he'll throw Afghanistan into the mix, and he'll throw Iraq in there, and the unit that I was on, we replaced them so that they could go to Afghanistan, and it was like he was on the base the 173rd, one of the 173rd Airborne was on, and the 173rd Airborne, this was in the initial phase of Iraq. They actually went to Iraq and airdropped into Iraq. So, he just had this obsession with it, had to say Afghanistan somehow because it was, that was a just war and Iraq wasn't. So let's say somehow that this unit was going to Afghanistan, and 99% of the people just would look at that and whatever. When I got into this whole digging into the dirt of this guy, then it's like, well, they went to Iraq. I mean, but he says we went there and replaced them so they could go to Afghanistan. Well, people look.
Actually, I got a great example of this. Tom Behrends, who was in the National Guard with Tim Walz. Check this out. This is September 11th, 2021, just a couple years ago.
Right.
This is the written text. He said it a little bit different. I could play the audio too, but just to see how he does this. In the years after that classroom, I had the privilege of serving in the state's National Guard with you. Period. Next sentence. I stood one night in the dark of night on the tarmac at Bagram Air Base in Iraq and watched a military ramp ceremony, a soldier's body being loaded into a plane and returned home. And he goes on. I guess he went to that air base when he was a congressman many, many years later, but he just smushed it all into one thing, right? It's like classroom, served in National Guard in Iraq.
Right.
Bagram, right? And it's like, if you don't know better, there's decades of time in between those things. He wasn't in Iraq as combat in National Guard. He was there as a congressman doing something. But he makes it all seem like one thing to the average person.